The boy was already there when Thomas Mercer came through the revolving door of 400 Hargrove Street on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks before anyone in the building thought to say anything about it. Mercer didn't see him that first morning, or the second. He came through those doors the way he had come through them every weekday for 11 years, at 6:48 in the morning, coffee in his left hand, phone in his right, the particular forward lean of a man whose mind had already been at his desk for 2 hours before his body arrived. The security desk, the elevator bank, the 41st floor, that was the geometry of his morning, and he moved through it with the unthinking precision of someone who stopped noticing his surroundings the moment they stopped surprising him. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The boy was in the alcove to the left of the main entrance, tucked between a concrete pillar and the ornamental hedge that the building's management had installed 3 years ago because the design consultant had said it would soften the building's street presence. The hedge was a gesture, mostly. It didn't soften anything. But it was dense enough and the alcove was recessed enough that a person sitting in it with their knees pulled to their chest and a flattened cardboard box beneath them could be, to someone moving with the forward lean and the coffee and the phone, functionally invisible. The boy had a gray sweatshirt. He had sneakers that were dark blue originally, and now the dark blue had gone to something that wasn't quite any color, worn through at both big toes. He had a backpack, black, with a broken zipper on the main compartment held closed with a bent paper clip threaded through the 2 zipper pulls. And he had a library book. That was the detail that finally stopped Thomas Mercer on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of October. Not the boy himself, not the cardboard, not the sneakers. The library book. It was a large-format book, the kind libraries kept in the oversized section, thick and worn at the corners, and the boy had it open across his knees in the gray 6:50 morning light. Reading. Not pretending to read. Reading. His finger moved across the page in the way of someone who is genuinely tracking words rather than performing attention, and his face had the particular focused stillness of a child who is not in the cold, drafty alcove of a financial district office building but is somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the book has taken him. Mercer stopped. He stood on the sidewalk for what might have been 30 seconds with the October wind moving through the gap between buildings and his coffee going cold in his hand. He looked at the boy. The boy did not look up. His finger continued across the page. Then Mercer's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant, Helen, about the 7:30 call with the Singapore office. He looked at it, looked back at the alcove and went through the revolving door. He thought about the boy at 7:15 during the Singapore call, which was unusual because during the Singapore call Thomas Mercer was not generally in the habit of thinking about anything other than the Singapore call. He had built Mercer Capital Group from a 2-person operation in a shared office space in 1997 into one of the largest private equity firms in the Midwest, with assets under management that had reached, as of the previous quarter's report, $4.2 billion. He had done this by being, among other things, the kind of man who was fully present in every room he entered. It was the quality his partners cited most often when they described him to people who hadn't met him. He listens, they said. You can tell he is actually thinking about what you're saying. He was not fully present in the Singapore call at 7:15. He was thinking about the library book. The boy's name was Caleb Roy. He was 10 years old, though he looked smaller than 10 because he had not been eating consistently for the past 7 weeks, and the body of a 10-year-old, when it is not being fed consistently, has a way of drawing in on itself, of becoming compact and careful with its energy, the way a flame turns small in wind. He had been sleeping in the alcove at 400 Hargrove for 19 days. Before that, he had slept in the alcove of a dry-cleaning establishment on Merchant Street for 6 nights. And before that in the covered parking structure of a shopping mall on the west side of the city for 4 nights before a security guard found him and told him he had to move along. The guard had not been unkind about it. He'd said, "Son, you can't be here," and there had been something in the way he said it that suggested he would have preferred a world in which the sentence wasn't necessary. Caleb had said, "Yes, sir," and moved along, because he had learned in the past 7 weeks that the best responses to people in authority were brief and cooperative and did not invite extended conversation. He was from a town called Millhaven, 60 miles north of the city, a place of 12,000 people built around a furniture manufacturing plant that had closed in 2019 and whose absence had restructured the local economy in the particular and brutal way that such closures restructure small towns, quietly at first and then all at once. His mother, Diane Roy, had worked in the plant's administrative office for 14 years. When the plant closed, she had taken a job at the regional medical center in Millhaven as a records clerk, a job that paid 22% less than her previous one, and that she was grateful for in the specific way you are grateful for things that are less than what you needed but more than nothing. Caleb's father, Robert Roy, had worked the plant floor for 9 years and had been among the 240 workers whose severance checks arrived in white envelopes on the same Friday the closure was announced, 3 weeks before Christmas. Robert had not handled it well, which was an inadequate way of describing something that took 3 years to complete its damage, and that Caleb had watched from the age of 7 with the particular attention of a child who understands that something is wrong without having the context to understand what or why. Robert had left when Caleb was 9, not dramatically, not with a scene. He had simply been there on a Thursday evening and not there on Friday morning, and the absence had a different quality from his usual absences, which Caleb had learned to read with some accuracy. This one had the quality of something finished. Diane had held things together in the way that women in her situation hold things together, through work and through will and through the specific daily discipline of not letting herself look at the full shape of their circumstances for too long at one time. She worked her 37 hours at the medical center and picked up weekend shifts at a grocery on Route 9 and made the rent on their 2-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street and kept the refrigerator filled to a level that wasn't full but was enough. And she had a way of making enough feel like plenty that Caleb would not understand the difficulty of until he was much older. She had a cough in January that she treated with over-the-counter medication because the medical center's employee health plan had a deductible she couldn't meet before February, and the cough persisted through February and into March and became something more than a cough by April, and the diagnosis that came in May, pneumonia complicated by something that the doctors wanted to look at more carefully, had landed Caleb in the care of his maternal aunt, his mother's younger sister, Patricia, who lived in the city and who had agreed to take him without enthusiasm and in a tone that Caleb understood clearly meant temporary. Patricia worked nights at a distribution center and slept days and kept her apartment in the specific order of someone who lived alone by preference and had organized everything to suit one person and one person only. She was not cruel. She fed him and she let him watch television in the evenings and she did not say anything unkind to him, but she was also not warm, and there was a quality to the space between them in her 1-bedroom apartment, where Caleb slept on a pull-out sofa, that had the particular texture of an arrangement both parties understood was not the real thing. He had been at Patricia's for 3 weeks when she received the news that her night shift position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring, and the change in the apartment's atmosphere after that phone call was something Caleb registered in his bones before it had been stated. He heard her on the phone that night, after she thought he was asleep. He heard the specific sound of a person trying to figure out how to make numbers work that do not want to work. He had heard that sound before from his mother, at the kitchen table on Cedar Street. He left on a Wednesday morning before Patricia woke up. He left a note on the kitchen counter, written on a piece of paper from his school notebook, that said, "Thank you for having me. I'll be fine. I'll call when I can." He signed it Caleb. He had $43 in his backpack, in a zipper pocket that still worked. He had a change of clothes, a photograph of his mother from the previous summer that she had printed at the pharmacy and put in a plastic sleeve, and 4 library books he had checked out the week before from the City Branch Library 2 blocks from Patricia's apartment and not yet returned. He had not planned further than leaving. He was 10 years old, and the plan horizon of a 10-year-old operating alone is necessarily short. What he had was the understanding, arrived at through observation over several difficult years, that being in a place where you were not wanted had costs that were sometimes higher than being in no particular place at all. And that being in no particular place at all, if you were careful and quiet and did not invite attention, was survivable. He had been surviving for 7 weeks. The city had a particular education to offer in those 7 weeks, and Caleb received it in the concentrated way of someone who has no alternative. He learned which doorways offered the most shelter from the wind and which stayed damp. He learned that the library branch on 5th and Clement opened at 9 and closed at 8 and was warm and had bathrooms and librarians who did not ask questions as long as you were quiet and appeared to be reading, which he always was. He learned that the Sunrise mission on Delaney offered a meal at noon and another at 5:30, and that the line moved quickly and that the people who worked there said please and thank you and meant them. He learned that the best time to use the restroom at the bus station on Terminal Avenue was before 7 in the morning, when it was clean. He learned the routes and rhythms of the city at ground level, the invisible infrastructure of a place that most of its inhabitants moved through without seeing. He kept up with his library books. This was not a practical decision. It was simply what he did because it was what he had always done, because books were the one thing that had never shifted on him, never closed early, never run out. He read whatever the library had in the sections he liked, which were history, geography, and the large-format nature books in the oversized section that had photographs of places he had not been and probably would not go but liked to know existed. He returned his books when they were due and checked out new ones and kept his card in the front pocket of his backpack alongside the $43, which had become $31 and then $19 and then $8.40 over the course of 7 weeks. He had chosen the alcove at 400 Hargrove partly because the ornamental hedge broke the wind and partly because the building's overnight heating system vented through a grate near the pillar, and on cold nights the grate pushed warm air that, if you positioned the cardboard correctly, reached you. But mostly he had chosen it because the block was quiet at night and the security guard who did the exterior rounds, a man of about 60 named Gerald who wore the uniform of a private security company and moved with the unhurried competence of someone who had been doing the job long enough to know exactly how much of it required urgency, had seen him on the second night and had not said move along. Gerald had stood in the entrance of the alcove and looked at Caleb for a moment. Caleb looked back. Gerald had the face of a man who had seen a number of things in his life and had developed a settled, unsentimental response to most of them. But something in his expression when he looked at the boy, at the cardboard, at the library book propped against the backpack, had shifted briefly into something that wasn't settled at all. "How old are you?" he'd said. 12, Caleb said. He was 10. Gerald, who had grandchildren, knew 10 from 12 with some precision. He looked at Caleb for another moment. Then he said, "You can't be here after 7 when the day staff arrives. You understand that? I can't have that conversation with the day manager." Caleb said, "Yes, sir. I'm always gone before 6:30. Gerald looked at him. "Where do you go?" "Library opens at 9, Caleb said. "I go to the mission for breakfast at 7:15. Gerald was quiet. Then he said, "It's gonna get cold. You got enough of a jacket?" Caleb looked at his sweatshirt. "I'll find something." Gerald went back inside. The next morning, at 6:20, when Caleb was folding his cardboard and putting it behind the hedge where he kept it during the day, there was a navy blue fleece jacket on the concrete outside the alcove, folded neatly. No note. Caleb put it on. It was 2 sizes too large. It was warm. He had been in the alcove for 19 days when Thomas Mercer stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the library book and then went inside. Thomas Mercer was 58 years old and had spent the majority of those years being, by most measurable standards, exceptional. He had grown up in a mid-sized city in Indiana, the son of a high school math teacher and a bookkeeper, and had gotten to the University of Chicago on a scholarship that he had worked for with a single-mindedness that his parents, decent and hardworking and slightly bewildered by the intensity of him, had found equal parts admirable and exhausting. He had an MBA before he was 26 and had worked at 2 investment banks before deciding at 31 that the thing he wanted to build was his own. Mercer Capital had started in a shared office space with a conference room they rented by the hour and a receptionist they shared with a dental practice. It had grown because Thomas Mercer had a quality that was difficult to describe and very easy to feel in a room, a combination of patience and precision, a willingness to understand a thing completely before acting on it and a quickness of action once he had, that had made investors over 27 years reliably choose him over the alternatives. He had married at 35, a woman named Catherine who was a structural engineer and who had, over the course of their 22-year marriage, built a career of her own with a focus and an intelligence that he had genuinely admired and occasionally, in the years when Mercer Capital was consuming most of the available oxygen in their shared life, failed to adequately say so. The divorce, when it came 4 years ago, had been conducted with the same absence of drama that had characterized most of their best interactions. There were no children. There were 2 properties and a financial settlement that was fair by any standard. They were still, in the particular careful way of people who shared a long history and had chosen not to destroy it, something adjacent to friends. He had, in the 4 years since the divorce, lived alone in a penthouse apartment 11 blocks from the office that was expensively and thoroughly appointed and that he spent, by his own rough calculation, 6 waking hours per day in, most of which were spent sleeping or getting dressed. He had good suits and good shoes and a kitchen he did not cook in and a cleaning service that came on Thursdays and kept the apartment at a standard of order that made it, Helen his assistant once observed, look like no one actually lived there. He had not examined this observation when she made it. He was examining it now on a Wednesday afternoon in October, sitting at his desk on the 41st floor with the city laid out below him and a market analysis he was supposed to be reading open on his screen and the image of a boy reading a library book in an alcove at 6:50 in the morning occupying a portion of his attention he had not allocated to it. He pulled up the morning security log on his internal system. He had the administrative access as building owner to the security desk's intake records. There were 22 entries for Tuesday morning, mostly routine. He scanned them and found what he was looking for near the bottom, a notation made at 14 minutes past 7 by the day security supervisor, a man named Phil Draper. Child approximately 10 to 12 sleeping in North Alcove. Advised to vacate. Complied. Mercer read this twice. Then he opened a new email to Helen and typed, "Find out who handles our building security contract. I want a call with them this week." He closed the email without sending it. He opened it again. He changed the subject line from security contract review to something that better matched what he was actually asking about, which he was not yet sure how to name. He closed it again. He stood at the window for a moment and looked at the city. Below him, 41 floors down, the north alcove of 400 Hargrove was empty. The boy would be gone until morning. He went home at 7 that evening, which was early for him. He stood in his kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular. He thought about calling Catherine and then didn't. He thought about the boy reading in the cold and the library book open across his knees and the way his finger had moved along the line of words with the concentration of someone who was not performing anything for anyone. He ate a sandwich over the kitchen counter and went to bed at 9 and lay in the dark and thought about things he had not thought about in some time. The next morning, Thursday, he left his apartment 18 minutes earlier than usual. He stopped at the coffee cart on the corner of Hargrove and 5th, the one run by a man named Marco who was there at 6:15 every morning without exception, and who had Mercer's order ready before he finished crossing the street. He ordered 2 coffees. Marco looked at the second cup and then at Mercer without saying anything, in the way of a person who has learned over years that most things people do are their own business. The alcove was occupied. Caleb was awake already, sitting with the library book on his knees again, a different book this time. He looked up when Mercer stopped in front of the alcove, the same calm, watchful look he gave everything, the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned that reactions could be read and acted upon. Mercer held out the second coffee. Then he thought about this and took it back and said, "Do you drink coffee?" Caleb looked at the cup. "Sometimes," he said, "when I can get it." Mercer crouched down so he was not standing over him. He was wearing a $1,500 overcoat and crouching on a sidewalk in the October dark, and he did not think about either of these things. "What's your name?" "Caleb." "How old are you?" "A beat." The same pause Gerald got on the second night. 10. Mercer looked at him. He noticed the fleece jacket, 2 sizes too large, navy blue. He noticed the paper clip on the backpack zipper. He noticed the library book, which he could see now was a large-format book with photographs. He could make out the title, Atlas of the Natural World. He held the coffee out again. "Here, it's just going to get cold." Caleb took it. He held it the way you hold something warm when you have been cold for several hours. Both hands not for the coffee, for the warmth. "What are you reading?" Mercer asked. Caleb turned the cover toward him. "Any good?" "It's about migration," Caleb said. "How animals know where to go. How they navigate. Some of them use the magnetic field of the earth." He said this in the matter-of-fact tone of someone relaying information they found genuinely interesting rather than performing conversation. "They can feel it. They have these deposits in their heads, magnetite crystals, like a compass built in." Mercer looked at him for a moment. "Where are you from?" "Millhaven. North of here." "Are you with anyone?" Caleb looked at his coffee. "No, sir." Mercer said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have somewhere warm to go today? Library opens at 9. Mission at 7:15. I know the mission. He paused. They doing okay up there? The food's good, Caleb said. The people are nice. Mercer stood up. He looked at the boy and then up at the building behind him. 41 floors of glass and steel that bore his name on a brass plate by the entrance. He thought about Phil Draper's notation in the security log. Advised to vacate. Complied. He said, I'll be back through those doors at 6 tonight. He nodded toward the entrance. You should be gone by then, or Draper's going to put another note in his log and then I'm going to have a harder conversation. Caleb looked at him calmly. I'm always gone by 6:30. Mercer nodded. He picked up his own coffee and straightened his coat. There was something he meant to say and didn't. He went through the revolving door. He was at his desk at 6:50, as usual. Helen brought the morning briefing at 7:10, as usual. The Singapore call was followed by a partners meeting and a lunch with a fund manager from Boston who was in town to discuss a co-investment, and an afternoon of documentation review that Helen had color-coded on his calendar in a system he had long since stopped trying to decode. The day was ordinary in all the ways his days were ordinary, which was to say full and efficient and entirely without the quality of stillness. But at 6:18 in the evening, when Mercer came through the lobby and out the revolving door into the October dark, he stopped. The alcove was empty. The cardboard was gone, tucked behind the hedge the way it always was, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The boy was gone too. But on the concrete in the alcove, held down by a small rock against the evening wind, was a folded piece of paper. Mercer looked at it for a moment. He picked it up. It was a page torn carefully from a notebook, folded in quarters. Inside, in the precise, small handwriting of a child who had been taught to write carefully and had kept the habit, were 5 words. Thank you for the coffee. Mercer stood in the evening dark on Hargrove Street with the piece of notebook paper in his hand and the wind moving through the gap between buildings and the city making its usual sounds around him, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time, something that did not have a name in the vocabulary of quarterly reports and portfolio analysis and the clean measurable language of value and return. He folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. He stood for a moment longer. Then he walked to his car. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in the dark apartment that Helen said looked like no one lived there and thought about things in a different order than usual. He thought about what it meant to be 10 years old and alone in a city of 400,000 people and to still, in that circumstance, find a library book about animal migration and read it in the cold because it was interesting. He thought about magnetite crystals and built-in compasses and how animals knew where to go. He thought about the paper clip holding the backpack closed. He thought about the note. 5 words on a torn page. Thank you for the coffee. He was at the coffee cart at 6:10 the next morning. 2 coffees again. And this time he also bought 2 of the pastries that Marco kept in the glass case, the ones that were thick and filled with something sweet that Mercer had never ordered for himself because he did not generally eat before 8. Caleb was in the alcove with the atlas of the natural world open to what appeared to be the section on oceanic birds. He looked up when Mercer stopped. His expression did the thing it did, the composed neutrality, and then something shifted in it when he saw the second coffee and the pastries, not all the way to warmth but in that direction, a slight softening at the edges. Mercer crouched. He held out the coffee and a pastry. Caleb took them. He looked at the pastry. He did not eat it immediately, which Mercer noticed. He set it carefully on top of his backpack with a deliberateness that suggested he was saving it. Still reading about migration? Mercer asked. Finished that section, Caleb said. Now I'm on birds. He held up the book. Albatrosses can fly for years without landing. He turned the book so Mercer could see the photograph. An enormous, white bird. Wings spread over gray ocean. They sleep while they're flying. They turn half their brain off at a time. Mercer looked at the photograph. Half their brain. So the other half is always watching, Caleb said. They never really stop paying attention. Mercer thought about this. He looked at the boy, at the serious, focused face, at the way he held the book. He said, Caleb, have you called anyone? Your parents or family? Anyone who knows where you are? Something in Caleb's expression changed. Not much. A small settling like a door pulled slightly closed. My mom's sick. She's in the hospital in Millhaven. I was staying with my aunt, but she lost her job, and I didn't want to make it worse for her. How long has your mom been in the hospital? Since May. Mercer sat with that for a moment. 6 months. Since May. Does she know where you are? I call her every Sunday from the library. He looked at his coffee. She thinks I'm still at my aunt's. Mercer looked at this 10-year-old boy who was carrying more than most adults he knew and was doing it with the quiet precision of an albatross. Half his mind on the horizon, never fully stopping, never fully landing, watching. He didn't ask the next question yet, the practical one, the one about shelters and social services and phone numbers, because he understood, in the way you understand certain things about certain people almost immediately, that those questions would close something that was currently open. He asked a different question instead. The bird, he said, nodding at the book. The albatross. You said it can fly for years. Where does it go? Caleb looked back at the page. Everywhere, he said. Southern Ocean, mostly. He traced a line with his finger across the photograph. They go all the way around, sometimes. The whole globe. He paused. But they always come back to the same island to nest. The same one where they were born. He looked up. They can find it from anywhere. That's the part one keep thinking about. How they always know the way back. Mercer nodded slowly. Then his phone buzzed and he stood and said he had to go. He straightened his coat. Tomorrow, he said. If you're here. Caleb looked up at him with the steady, undemanding look he had for most things. I'll be here, he said. Mercer went through the revolving door. He stopped in the lobby and stood for a moment in front of the elevator bank. Behind the security desk, Phil Draper was reviewing something on his monitor and did not look up. On the monitor's edge, Mercer could see the security camera feed from the exterior cameras, the north alcove visible on the bottom left screen. The boy in the fleece jacket, too large, with the coffee and the pastry and the book. Mercer pressed the elevator button and waited. On Sunday night at 10 minutes past 10, his phone rang. He was in the apartment reading, which he did more than people knew, in the quiet hours after the city wound down. The number was unfamiliar, a local area code. He answered. There was a pause. Then a voice, small and uncertain in the way of someone who has worked up to making a call and is suddenly unsure of the script now that someone has answered. Is this Mr. Mercer? Mercer sat up. Yes. This is Caleb. From the alcove. He paused. I hope it's okay that I called. Gerald told me your name and I looked up the number for the company. He paused again. I'm at the library. It closes in 20 minutes. Mercer said, I know who you are. Are you all right? Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment. I just wanted to say thank you again. For the coffees and the pastries. It was very kind of you. Mercer leaned back in his chair. He thought about what he wanted to say and understood that most of it was premature and that premature kindness sometimes landed wrong. He said, you called information to find my number. Yes, sir. I looked up Mercer Capital and called the main line and left my name with the recording. Then I waited to see if you'd call back. You were testing something. A pause. I wanted to know if you were actually what you seemed like. Mercer was quiet for a moment. He thought that was very sensible. What did you decide? I decided you probably were. That's why I'm calling. Mercer sat with this for a moment, this 10-year-old's assessment of his character, rendered with the directness of someone who had learned to read people quickly because getting it wrong had costs he couldn't absorb. He said, Caleb, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that there is no wrong answer and nothing changes tomorrow morning based on what you say. Okay. Is there anything you need right now? Tonight? The pause that followed was long enough that Mercer thought the boy might have hung up. Then, I'm fine. I have my spot. Gerald checks. I know Gerald checks. He's good, Caleb said. He's careful about it. Yes, he is. Mercer paused. He thought about the $31 and then the $19 and the $8.40. He thought about the saved pastry, set carefully on top of the backpack. What if I came by in the morning, he said. Not just to bring coffee. To talk. About your mom. About options. I know some people. There was another pause, shorter this time. Okay, Caleb said. Then Mr. Mercer. Yes. I read about albatrosses some more today. The part one didn't get to before. He paused. They mate for life. They find each other again after flying separately for months. Thousands of miles apart and they find each other. Mercer was quiet. I thought that was worth knowing, Caleb said. I don't know exactly why. I just thought it was. Mercer looked at the window of his apartment. The city below it, lit and moving and full of the particular restless energy of a Friday night. He thought about the alcove in the cold and the boy with the atlas and the magnetic crystals and the compass built in, always knowing the way back. "It is worth knowing," he said. "Get some sleep, Caleb." "Yes, sir. Good night." "Good night." He set the phone down and sat in the quiet apartment that looked like no one lived there, and he stayed very still for a while. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Saturday morning came in with a sky the color of old pewter, the kind of sky that Ohio produces in late October with the indifferent efficiency of a place that has been doing winter for a very long time and no longer feels the need to announce it. Mercer was at the coffee cart at 6:02, 18 minutes earlier than his usual Friday time, which Marco noted with a raise of his eyebrows that he kept to himself. 2 coffees, 2 pastries, and this time a third item, a paper bag from the bakery 2 doors down that Mercer had gone to specifically because it opened at 5:45 and because he had stood in front of its window the evening before, after the call from Caleb, and decided that the pastries from the cart were not enough. The bag held 2 egg sandwiches wrapped in foil and a container of orange juice. He walked the half block to 400 Hargrove and stopped in front of the alcove. Caleb was awake. He was always awake by 6, Mercer had learned. He had the fleece jacket on over his sweatshirt and his knees drawn up and the atlas of the natural world open across his legs. But he was not reading. He was looking at the street, the early Saturday street, which had a different quality from the weekday one, emptier, slower, the city at a lower frequency. He looked at Mercer without surprise. He had called last night. He had confirmed the morning. He was a boy who, when he said he would be somewhere, was there. Mercer crouched down and held out the coffees and the bag. Caleb looked inside the bag. His expression did what it sometimes did when he received something he hadn't expected, a brief, controlled opening, and then the closing back to neutral. He took out one of the sandwiches and looked at it. He did not immediately eat it, which Mercer had noticed before and now understood was not shyness. The boy ate deliberately, with attention, the way you eat when you have learned not to take a meal for granted. "Go ahead," Mercer said. Caleb unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. He chewed and swallowed and looked at the street. "That's good," he said. They ate together in the alcove in the gray October morning. Mercer crouched and then, after a moment, sitting on the concrete beside the cardboard because crouching for a sustained conversation at 58 was not something his knees endorsed. He was wearing good trousers and a coat that cost more than 2 months of Gerald's salary, and he sat on the concrete and did not think about either of these things. He said, "I want to ask you about your mother. I want to understand her situation better. Not because I'm going to do anything you haven't agreed to. I want to understand because I'd like to help if I can, and I can't help properly without knowing what's actually happening." Caleb looked at him. He had the sandwich in both hands and his coffee beside him on the cardboard, and he looked at Mercer with the steady, assessing look that was one of his most consistent qualities, the look of someone who was deciding not what to say but how much of the true thing to say. "She has pneumonia," he said. "That's what they told me in May. But there was something else. They said they needed to look at it more carefully." He paused. "She didn't tell me much. She said she didn't want me to worry." Mercer looked at him. "What hospital?" "Millhaven Regional." He paused. "She was in room 214. That's the last I knew. I haven't talked to her since 2 Sundays ago. The phone at the library was busy both times I tried." "What's her full name?" "Diane Roy." He spelled it. R-O-Y. Mercer took out his phone and sent a text to Helen, which he knew would reach her even on a Saturday morning because Helen had what she described as an inability to ignore her phone that she had long since accepted as a permanent condition. The text said, "Millhaven Regional Hospital. Patient named Diane Roy. I need to know her current status and who her treating physician is. Use whatever channels you need. Today if possible." He put the phone away. Then he looked at Caleb, who had been watching him type with a careful attention. "I have an assistant," Mercer said. "She's good at finding things out. We'll know more today." Caleb nodded. He looked at the street again. He picked up his orange juice. After a moment he said, "Mr. Mercer, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why are you doing this?" He said it without accusation, without suspicion, with the genuine intellectual interest of someone who wanted to understand a thing. You don't know me. You could just walk past. Most people do. Mercer thought about the question seriously, the way he had learned from 58 years of decision-making to think about questions that sounded simple. He said, I stopped one morning because you were reading. Not pretending to read. Actually reading. In the cold, before 6:30 in the morning because you wanted to know what was in the book. He paused. I've spent a lot of years in rooms full of people who were pretending to pay attention. You weren't pretending anything. It stopped me. Caleb processed this. He turned the orange juice container in his hands. People usually either ignore me or call someone, he said. The ones who stop and talk usually want to feel like they helped. They give me $1 and walk away feeling better. Mercer looked at him. Which am I? Caleb looked back at him with the gray, direct eyes. I don't know yet. He said it without apology. That's why I called last night. I wanted to see. What did you decide? He was quiet for a moment. You answered on the second ring, he said. You didn't put me on hold or call back through an assistant. He paused. And you're sitting on a sidewalk right now. He looked briefly at Mercer's coat. In what I think are expensive trousers. Mercer looked down at his trousers. They are, he agreed. Caleb almost smiled. Not quite. The edges of it arrived and withdrew. So I think you might be different, he said. But I'm still deciding. Mercer nodded. That's sensible. They finished their breakfast. The city came up slowly around them, the Saturday city, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck on the far end of the block, the lights in the building across the street coming on floor by floor. Caleb told him more about Millhaven, not in a single narrative but in pieces, the way he told everything, offered in portions sized for how well he knew the person receiving them. He described the furniture plant, the size of it, the way the whole town organized itself around its shifts and its whistle. He described how it was after, the particular quality of a place that had lost the thing it was built around, not dramatic, not ruined, just quieter and smaller somehow. As if the town itself had taken a breath and never quite let it back out. His father worked there, he said. 9 years. Mercer looked at the street. After it closed, Caleb said he tried some things. He drove for a delivery service for a while. He applied at the regional distribution center in Harker, but they weren't hiring. He looked at his hands. He wasn't bad. He just ran out of things to try. What was the plant called? Valley Craft. He said it plainly, the name of something he had grown up knowing, the way you know the name of a river or a school, as part of the texture of the place. Valley Craft Furniture. They made dining room sets mostly. My dad said they were good ones. He paused. Not that it mattered in the end. Mercer went very still. He kept his face arranged. He had spent 3 decades in rooms where the ability to keep your face arranged while your mind moved fast was not optional. He arranged it now and looked at the street and said nothing for a moment and let the thing he had just heard settle into place. Valley Craft Furniture. Millhaven, Ohio. He knew the name. Not because he followed the furniture industry or because Millhaven was the kind of town that appeared in the business press. He knew the name because 3 years ago, Mercer Capital had taken a minority stake in a private equity vehicle called Thornfield Industrial Partners, a co-investment on the recommendation of his partner Marcus Webb, and Thornfield's primary acquisition at the time had been a mid-size manufacturing group in the Ohio River Valley that included, among other holdings, a furniture operation it had subsequently restructured. Restructured was the word used in the investment summary. He had read the summary. He had signed the commitment letter. The word restructured had meant what it always meant in those documents. He sat with this on the sidewalk outside 400 Hargrove and did not show any of it. He said, "How old were you when the plant closed?" 7, Caleb said. "Almost 8. Mercer nodded. He picked up his coffee and drank. Outside, a cab turned slowly onto Hargrove and moved past without stopping. In the alcove, Caleb had gone back to the Atlas of the Natural World, open now to a section on bird migration that he had apparently been reading before Mercer arrived, his finger tracing a route across a map of the Pacific. Mercer's phone buzzed. Helen, at 8:47 on a Saturday morning. He looked at the message. Found her. Diane Roy, Millhaven Regional, room 219. Transferred from 214 in September. Current admission is ongoing. Treating physician is a Dr. Anita Prash, pulmonology. I have her contact, but she won't speak to you without patient authorization. What you need to know before you call. The diagnosis beyond pneumonia is stage 2 pulmonary fibrosis. Progressive. She's been in treatment since June. Her case manager's name is Sandra Hollis. Mercer read this twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Caleb, at the boy with the atlas and the fleece jacket and the paper clip on the backpack zipper, tracing migration routes with one careful finger. He thought about what pulmonary fibrosis meant, the clinical reality of it, the word progressive. He thought about Caleb calling the library phone from a payphone every Sunday morning and getting a busy signal. He said, "Caleb, when is the last time you actually spoke to your mother?" Caleb looked up. 3 Sundays ago. She sounded tired. He looked at the book. She said she was getting better. She said it the way people say things when they want them to be true. He said it with the precise observation of a 10-year-old who had learned to read adults with a kind of forensic attention. He said it and looked back at his book, and Mercer sat beside him in the gray morning and understood that there were things this child didn't know yet about his mother's condition, and that one of them was that it was more serious than tired. He said, "I'd like to try to set up a call for you. With your mother. Through proper channels, with her permission. Not just a library phone. A real call where she can hear you clearly." Caleb looked at him. He looked at the phone in Mercer's jacket pocket. He said, "You already found something out, didn't you?" Mercer looked at him directly. "I found out she's still at Millhaven Regional. I found out the name of her doctor. That's all I have right now." This was true as far as it went. He did not say the rest of it yet. Not because he intended to keep it from Caleb, but because the rest of it was not his to deliver. Some news belonged to doctors and to mothers, not to men on sidewalks who had known the child for 4 mornings. Caleb looked at the street. "Can you actually do that? Get me a real call?" "I think so, yes." "Okay," Caleb said. He looked at the atlas. "Thank you." They sat together for another 20 minutes. Caleb showed him the migration map, the routes that went thousands of miles across ocean and came back to the same place each time. He told Mercer about a species of shearwater that spent half its life at sea and never touched land except to breed. He said it with the particular quality of attention that meant he had thought about this and turned it over and found something in it worth keeping. Mercer listened. He sat on the concrete outside his building on a Saturday morning and listened to a 10-year-old boy describe the navigational systems of seabirds and thought about a town called Millhaven and a furniture plant and a word in an investment summary that had meant, to him and to Marcus Webb and to the other partners at Mercer Capital, a number in a column, a return calculation, a reallocation of assets. He thought about what that word looked like from the other side, from the perspective of a man who had worked a plant floor for 9 years and come home on a Friday in December with a white envelope. He went upstairs at 9:15. He sat at the desk in his corner office, which was empty on Saturday except for the weekend security and the cleaning staff, and he pulled up the Thornfield Industrial Investment file and read it more carefully than he had read it at the time. He had read it at the time in the way that partners read co-investment materials, with the analytical attention reserved for the numbers and the risk profile and the exit structure. He had not read it the way he was reading it now, looking for the name of the town. Looking for what the word restructured had meant on the ground, in practice, to the people who worked there. Valley Craft Furniture. Millhaven, Ohio. Acquired by Thornfield Industrial 2018. Operations consolidated to primary facility in Tennessee, 2019. Millhaven location closed. Workforce reduction. 243 positions. 243. He sat at the desk for a long time. Through the window, 41 floors below, the north alcove of 400 Hargrove was empty. Caleb would have gone to the library by now or to the mission. He would be in a warm room with the atlas of the natural world open to the Pacific, reading about shearwaters. Mercer picked up the phone and called Helen. "I need you to find a hospital case manager named Sandra Hollis at Millhaven Regional. I need a phone number. And I need you to call Dr. Anita Prash's office and leave a message that Thomas Mercer from Mercer Capital Group would like to speak with her at her earliest availability regarding a family situation. Don't use the company name on the Hollis call. Just say you're calling on behalf of a family friend." Helen said she would have both by end of day. He hung up and sat for a moment and then called Marcus Webb, who answered on the third ring in the particular tone of a man whose Saturday morning had not anticipated a call from his managing partner. Marcus, Mercer said. The Thornfield deal. The Valley Craft plant in Millhaven. What do you know about the closure? There was a pause. That was 3 years ago, Tom. I know when it was. Another pause. Marcus shifted. It was a consolidation play. They were running 2 plants below capacity. Moving production to Tennessee made the numbers work. How many people? In Millhaven? A beat. 240, 250. Why are you asking about this? I'm just doing some thinking, Mercer said. He didn't explain further. Marcus, who had been his partner for 16 years and knew when not to push, said he'd pull whatever files Marcus Capital had on the deal if it would help. Mercer said that would be fine. He hung up. He sat at his desk until noon. He was not reviewing files. He was thinking with the kind of sustained, non-linear attention he brought to the problems that didn't resolve on spreadsheets. He was thinking about 243 people and about a word in a summary document and about a boy in a fleece jacket reading about birds that always knew the way home. Phil Draper found him on Monday morning. Draper was 43, broad-shouldered, with the manner of someone who had spent enough years in security work to view every potential complication as a problem to be processed out of existence. He was competent. He was thorough. He was, in the particular way of people who are very good at one kind of thinking, occasionally blind to the kinds of thinking that operated outside his professional frame. He came to Mercer's office at 8:15 with a printed report and the slight forward tilt of someone who believed he was delivering news his employer would want to hear. Mr. Mercer. The juvenile. North Alcove. He set the report on the desk. I filed 2 incident reports now. Friday and this morning he was back. He paused. I've been in contact with the city's outreach coordination office and they have a youth shelter placement program. If you'd like, I can arrange a referral through the non-emergency line and they'll send someone out. Mercer looked at the report without picking it up. His expression was the one he used for situations that required patience. He said, Phil, what time did you log Friday's report? 7:14. And what time did I come through the lobby that morning? Draper paused. He recalculated. Around 6:50. So the child was already gone when you filed the report. Draper's posture shifted slightly. He left voluntarily at 6:40. Before the day shift. Mercer nodded. He picked up the report and looked at it. The language was efficient and neutral. Juvenile, approximately 10 to 12 years. Present in North Alcove. Complied when advised to vacate. He thought about the word juvenile. He thought about the boy who had called the company main line on a Sunday night, left his name, waited to see if Mercer called back, then called again when he'd decided the answer was yes. He said, Phil, leave the child alone. Draper looked at him. Sir, the liability exposure for the building is... I understand the liability exposure. Mercer looked at him with the direct, flat attention he used when he wanted a sentence to arrive as a complete thought. Leave the child alone. If you receive any communication from the outreach office, forward it to Helen and she'll handle it. If anyone on the day staff raises an issue, they can come to me directly. Draper looked at the report in Mercer's hand. He had the look of a man who had a procedure and was watching someone put the procedure in a drawer. He said, Understood, and took the report back and left. Helen appeared in the doorway 10 seconds after Draper's footsteps faded. She had the look she wore when she was filing something away for later. She said, The case manager at Millhaven Regional called back this morning. Sandra Hollis. She said she can speak with you at 2 o'clock. Mercer said, Put it on the calendar. He was at his desk at 1:58. Sandra Hollis answered with the measured efficiency of a case manager who handled difficult situations for a living and had learned that measured efficiency was a form of kindness because it told people where the floor was. She said, Mr. Mercer, I understand you're calling about Diane Roy. Yes, Mercer said. I'm in contact with her son, Caleb. I want to understand the situation so I can be helpful. I'm not family, I want to be clear about that. I'm a person who has some resources and who is trying to make sure this child has the right information and the right support. There was a pause. Then Sandra Hollis said, How old are you, Mr. Mercer? 58. And you met the boy how? He's been sleeping in the alcove of my office building. He's been there for 3 weeks. Another pause. A different kind. He said, I know that's an unusual situation to be calling from. I'm not asking you to tell me anything that isn't appropriate to share. I just need to know whether the boy's mother is aware of where he is. Sandra Hollis was quiet for a moment. She said, Mr. Mercer, Diane Roy is my patient. She is aware that her son left his aunt's residence. She is not fully aware of his current circumstances. She has been, in terms of her medical situation, not in a position where we felt it was constructive to add that to her understanding of things. Mercer said, How serious is her condition? Serious, Sandra Hollis said. The fibrosis is progressing. We have her on a medication protocol that is slowing it but not reversing it. She looked at him over the phone. Mercer could feel it. She's aware of her prognosis, Mr. Mercer. She's been aware for 2 months. What she doesn't know is that her son is alone in a city. She believes he's with his aunt. He said, I want to arrange a call between Caleb and his mother. Not a library payphone. A real, private call where she can actually hear him and he can hear her. Sandra Hollis said, I think Diane would want that very much. He said, I want to come to Millhaven. Not to interfere. To understand the situation fully before I try to help with any of it. Would that be possible? There was a pause. I can't authorize a visit on a patient's behalf, she said. But I can tell Diane Roy that a man named Thomas Mercer would like to come and speak with her, and I can tell her why, and she can make her own decision. Mercer said, that's exactly the right way to do it. He said thank you and hung up and sat for a moment at the desk. Through the window, the city ran its ordinary Monday. Traffic on Hargrove. The coffee cart on the corner. The ornamental hedge at the building's entrance. Green still, barely. The last of the season's green. He picked up the phone and called Helen. He said, I need to go to Millhaven, Ohio. This week if possible. Thursday. Can you arrange a car? Helen said she would. She did not ask why. After 11 years, she had learned which questions to ask and which to hold. That evening, at 6:08, when Mercer came through the revolving door, he stopped on the sidewalk on the way to his car. Caleb was in the alcove, the atlas on his knees, the October dark full now, the temperature down to the low 40s. He looked up when Mercer stopped. Mercer said, I spoke to a case manager at your mother's hospital today. Her name is Sandra Hollis. She's going to arrange a call for Thursday morning. 8 o'clock. You'll use my phone in a private office. He paused. Is that all right? Caleb looked at him. He was very still. Yes, he said. His voice had a quality it hadn't had before, a careful quality, the quality of someone holding something they were afraid of dropping. Yes, that's all right. Mercer nodded. He looked at the alcove, at the temperature, at the boy in the fleece that had been warm enough for October but was not going to be warm enough for November. He said, Caleb, there's a hotel 4 blocks north on 5th Street. The Clement. I'd like to arrange a room for you. Long-term rate week to week. My office would handle it. Caleb looked at him. He did not immediately accept, which Mercer had expected. He said, I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because then I'd owe you something, Caleb said. He said it plainly, without resentment, as a statement of how he understood the mechanics of the world to work. Things don't come free. I've learned that. Mercer considered this carefully. He said, let me explain how I'm thinking about it. You're 10 years old and it's getting cold. The hotel would mean you're safe and warm. That's the whole reason. He paused. What I want from you in return is exactly what you've already been giving me. Someone to bring coffee to in the morning. He paused. And the Albatross information. That's been genuinely useful. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. The long, straight look that cut right through whatever a person had arranged on the surface of their face. You already found out something else about my mom, he said. Not just that she's still at the hospital. Mercer held the look. Yes, he said. Is it bad? There are things that should come from your mother, he said, not from me. That's the right order. But I will tell you this. She's being well cared for. The people there know what they're doing. And Thursday morning you're going to talk to her. He paused. That's the most important thing right now. Caleb looked at the atlas on his knees. He turned one page. He looked at the October dark and the lit windows of the building above them and the street. Then he said, "Okay, the hotel. But I'm going to pay you back. I don't know how yet, but I will." Mercer said, "I know you will." He arranged it with Helen that evening. The Clement was 3 stars, clean, well-managed, and the manager, a woman named Carrie Park, handled the conversation with Helen with no questions and a room rate of $62 per night. Single room, 2nd floor, breakfast included. Long-term rate, week to week, billed to Mercer Capital's operations account under the category Helen created that said client accommodation. Caleb moved in on Tuesday evening. He arrived at the hotel with the backpack, the atlas, and the 3 remaining library books, and Carrie Park gave him his key card with the particular professional warmth of someone who had been told exactly what the situation was and had chosen to receive it without making it a thing. She showed him the breakfast room. She showed him where the ice machine was. She told him the Wi-Fi password and said she'd put it on a card in his room. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Of course, honey," and went back to the desk, and Caleb went upstairs with his key card and his backpack and his 3 library books, and he stood in the room for a moment with the door closed and looked at the bed and the window and the small clean bathroom and the radiator that worked. He sat on the edge of the bed. He had not slept in a bed in 7 weeks. He sat there for a while without moving. Then he opened the backpack and took out the photograph in the plastic sleeve. His mother, the previous summer, standing in the small yard behind the apartment on Cedar Street, squinting into the sun. She had her hand raised to shade her eyes, and she was laughing at something off camera. He propped it against the lamp on the nightstand and looked at it. He lay down on top of the covers without undressing and was asleep in 4 minutes. Across the building, 3 blocks west, Thomas Mercer sat in the apartment that looked like no one lived there and opened the Thornfield investment file on his laptop. He read it differently this time, all of it, not just the financial projections. He read the operational assessment of Valley Craft's Millhaven facility. He read the recommendation for consolidation. He read the language that said plant closure in Millhaven, workforce reduction of approximately 240 FTE, 240 full-time employees. He had signed the commitment letter. He had not thought about what was behind the number. He had thought about the return profile and the exit timeline and the co-investment terms. He had not thought about the man who had worked the floor for 9 years and come home with a white envelope, and the woman in the administrative office, and the apartment on Cedar Street, and the child who had been 7 years old at the time and who was now sleeping in a hotel room 4 blocks from here because he had nowhere else to go. He closed the laptop. He sat for a long time. He had made decisions like the Thornfield decision many times in his career. They were normal decisions in the language of his industry, efficient decisions, value-creating decisions. He had not examined them the way he was examining this one, because examining them required standing in a specific place and looking from a particular angle that the 41st floor had never provided. The boy on the sidewalk had provided it. He picked up the phone and sent a text to Marcus Webb. It was 11:20 at night, which he registered and sent anyway. "Marcus, the Thornfield deal, the Valley Craft closure. I want to know what, if anything, Mercer Capital owes to the community it exited. Not legally, ethically. Think about it and call me tomorrow." Marcus responded 12 minutes later, which told Mercer that Marcus had been awake and that the question had landed somewhere real. The text said, "I've been wondering the same thing since about 5 years into this business. Call me at 9. Helen had the drive to Millhaven arranged for Thursday. 3 hours each way, a car service, departure at 7. Mercer had not told Caleb he was going. He would tell him Wednesday evening, after the Thursday morning call with Diane had been confirmed. The order mattered. On Wednesday afternoon, Mercer was in a partners' meeting that ran from 2 to 4:30. The meeting was about a potential acquisition, a logistics company in the southeast with solid fundamentals and a management team Marcus had characterized as highly motivated, which was Marcus's phrase for people who wanted to get rich and were reasonably well positioned to do so. The numbers were good. The deal structure was clean. Mercer sat through the meeting with his full professional attention directed at the materials and said the right things at the right moments and understood everything on the table. He also understood, with a clarity that was new and a little uncomfortable, that the word acquisition in this room was a word that meant something different in other rooms. That the highly motivated management team was one layer of a structure that included layers he was not in this meeting to discuss, which were the layers that included the workers in the logistics facilities and the local economies those facilities were part of, and what happened to those layers when value was extracted and redirected. He had understood this in the abstract before. He understood it differently now. The difference was a boy with an atlas who had told him about albatrosses on a sidewalk. He did not say any of this in the meeting. He voted in favor of the due diligence process, which was the appropriate vote given what they knew at this stage, and he asked 2 additional questions about the company's workforce composition and regional employment footprint that were not the standard questions and that Marcus noted with a brief, attentive look across the table. After the meeting, Marcus stopped him in the hallway. He said, "You seem different this week." Mercer said, "I've been thinking about some things." "The kid in the alcove?" Mercer looked at him. "Did Helen say something?" Gerald from the overnight security rotation said something to the parking attendant, who said something to the receptionist on 12, who said something to Donna in compliance. Marcus paused. "It's a building, Tom. Everything moves through a building eventually." Mercer thought about Caleb, about the paperclip, about the note held down by a small rock. "Thank you for the coffee." He thought about the way the boy had tested him before trusting him, the specific and intelligent caution of a child who had been given good reasons to be careful. He said, "His name is Caleb. His mother is sick in a hospital 60 miles from here. He's been sleeping in the alcove for nearly a month." Marcus looked at him steadily. He was a good man, Marcus, in the specific and complicated way that most people in their industry were good people, which was that their goodness and their professional behavior existed in parallel tracks that occasionally intersected and occasionally did not. He said, "What do you need?" Mercer said, "I don't know yet. I'm still finding out what's actually needed." He paused. "What I know is that the direct line from Valleycraft to that alcove goes through us. Not all the way, but enough." Marcus was quiet. Then he said, "Yeah." He let that sit. "Yeah, I know." They stood in the hallway outside the conference room for a moment. The building made its building sounds, the HVAC system, the distant elevator, the muffled city coming through the glass. Marcus said, "Whatever you're planning, I'm in." Mercer nodded. He went back to his office. At 5:45 he sent a text to the number Caleb had called him from, which turned out to be the hotel's front desk, because Caleb had left it with Carey Park on his first night in case of emergency. The text said, "Call confirmed for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Come to the lobby at 400 Hargrove at 7:45. Tell the security desk Helen sent you." He paused, then added, "Bring the atlas if you want." The response came 8 minutes later, from Carey Park's desk phone, relayed through whatever system she had set up. It said, in the small, precise handwriting of a boy who took care with letters, "Okay. See you tomorrow." Outside, the November dark was settling over the city. In a hotel room on 5th Street, the photograph of a woman squinting into a summer sun was propped against a lamp on a nightstand, and a boy with a broken zipper on his backpack was sleeping in a real bed, and the atlas was on the floor beside him, open to the page where the shearwaters flew their impossible loops across the Pacific, going and returning, always knowing the way back. 3 blocks away, in an office on the 41st floor that was lit past the hour when the other offices had gone dark, Thomas Mercer sat at a window and looked at the city and thought about what it meant to have seen something from the wrong angle for a very long time, and what it required of you once you saw it from the right one. Caleb was in the lobby of 400 Hargrove at 7:43 on Thursday morning, 2 minutes early, which Mercer had expected. He had the atlas under one arm and the backpack over one shoulder, and he was standing near the security desk in the navy fleece jacket, looking at the lobby's architectural details with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. The ceiling was 30 feet of glass and steel. He appeared to be assessing it. Helen was already at her desk, which was unusual for 7:43, and which told Mercer something about how she had processed the information she had about this morning. She brought Caleb up herself rather than having the security desk call. She shook his hand when she introduced herself, not the modified handshake adults sometimes offered children, but a real one, which Caleb received with the gravity it deserved. She had set up a private office on the 42nd floor, one of the smaller meeting rooms, with a phone and a glass of water and a plate of fruit that she had brought from the kitchen without being asked. She had also, Mercer noticed, put a legal pad and a pen on the table, in case the boy wanted to write anything down. He thought it was the right instinct. Helen frequently had the right instinct. Caleb stood in the doorway of the meeting room and looked at the phone and the plate of fruit and the legal pad. He set the atlas carefully on the table and sat down. He looked at Mercer. "You can stay," he said, "if you want." Mercer sat in the chair by the window out of the way and said nothing. At 7:58, Helen dialed from her extension to the number Sandra Hollis had provided, the direct line to the room. It rang twice. There was the sound of a phone being picked up. Then a voice, thin and careful and recognizable even through the distance and the slight electronic flatness as a woman's voice. A woman who had been sick for a while and still had her mother's particular awareness for the sound of her child. "Hello?" Caleb opened his mouth and closed it. He put both hands flat on the table. Then he said, "Mom." What followed was not something Mercer felt he had the right to describe in detail later. It was private in the way that certain moments are private even when witnessed, belonging fully to the two people inside them. What he could say, sitting in the chair by the window with the city below and the atlas on the table and the legal pad untouched, was that the call lasted 31 minutes, and that there were long sections of it where neither of them said much and the line was just open, both of them present in the particular way of people who have been out of reach of each other for too long and need to simply confirm the other is real. And that at some point, about 20 minutes in, Caleb said, "I'm safe, Mom. I'm really safe. I'm in an office building with a man who's been helping me. His name is Thomas Mercer and he's all right. You can trust him." And Diane Roy, on the other end of the line in her room at Millhaven Regional, was quiet for a moment and then said, "What's his last name again?" And Caleb repeated it and she was quiet again and then she said, "Baby, I need to tell you something I should have told you before," and what came after that was delivered in a low voice that Mercer could not fully make out, and Caleb listened to it with his eyes fixed on the table, and when she finished he said, "I know, Mom. I know." And she said, "How do you know?" And he said, "I could tell. When you say things the way you want them to be true instead of the way they are. I could tell." She said she was sorry. He said she had nothing to be sorry for. She said she should have been honest with him. He said she was trying to protect him, and he understood that. He said it with a steadiness that Mercer found difficult to account for in a 10-year-old, and then understood as he sat there was not steadiness exactly, but the specific kind of composure that comes from having already done the internal work in private, in the alcove, in the library, in the hotel room with the photograph propped against the lamp. He had known for longer than anyone realized. He had just been waiting for her to be ready. When the call ended, Caleb sat with both hands still flat on the table and looked at the legal pad. He had not written anything on it. He picked up the pen and wrote something, and then turned the pad so Mercer could see it. Said, "She sounds like herself." Mercer looked at those 4 words for a moment. He said, "Yes, she does." He told Caleb on the drive back down to the lobby that he was going to Millhaven on Thursday afternoon. Not because he had asked Caleb's permission, but because he felt Diane Roy deserved the chance to understand who he was and what his relationship to her son looked like from someone other than her son. He said, "I want to meet her, if she's willing. Sandra Hollis is going to ask her." Caleb looked at him. "Why do you actually want to go?" "Because I think I owe her a conversation," Mercer said. He did not say more than that. He had decided that the Valleycraft connection was something to address face-to-face with Diane, not as a thing managed at a distance through intermediaries. It was the kind of debt that required a person in a room. Caleb thought about this. Then he said, "Tell her the atlas helped. She's the one who got me a library card. She said books were the one thing nobody could close a door on." Mercer drove to Millhaven on Thursday afternoon in the car Helen had arranged. A black sedan driven by a man named Paul who had been working for the car service for 12 years and had the gift of filling the interior with exactly the silence that his passenger needed. They left at 1 and arrived at 3:15, the drive unwinding through the flat Ohio countryside, the sky the same pewter it had been all week, the fields edging toward their winter colors, the towns along the route each bearing the particular look of places that had reorganized themselves around something that was no longer there. Millhaven announced itself with a water tower and a wide main street and the kind of commercial block that had a hardware store and a pharmacy and 2 or 3 empty storefronts with paper in the windows. Not ruined, not abandoned, just quieter than it had been built to be, the buildings still solid, the sidewalks maintained, but the foot traffic thin in the way of a place that had lost a significant portion of its reason for foot traffic and not yet found a replacement. Mercer looked at it through the car window. He had been through hundreds of towns like this over his career, on the way to somewhere else or in the aggregate view of market data as demographic information, as zip codes on an investment map. He had not been through one of them after sitting on a sidewalk with a specific child who had come from it, after learning the name of the man who had worked the plant floor and the name of the woman who had managed the administrative office, after understanding what the word restructured had meant to this particular street. Millhaven Regional Hospital was on the north side of town, a 3-story building in brick, functional and clean, the kind of regional hospital that served its community without excess and without failure, and whose staff worked hard precisely because the nearest large medical center was 40 miles away. Sandra Hollis met him at the main entrance, a woman of about 50 with short gray hair and the composed, direct manner of someone who had long since decided that her value to people was in clarity, not comfort. She said, "She's agreed to see you. She's been thinking about it since Tuesday. She told me she knows the name Thomas Mercer. She said it in a way that I understood meant she needed to speak with you." Mercer said, "She's right." He followed Sandra Hollis through the corridors to room 219. The hospital smelled the way hospitals smelled, antiseptic and cafeteria and the faint particular staleness of recirculated air, and Mercer walked through it thinking about Caleb on the phone that morning. "I could tell. When you say things the way you want them to be true instead of the way they are." Diane Roy was 41 years old, though she looked both younger and older in the way of people whose faces had held their youth while their eyes had moved ahead of it. She was sitting up in the bed with a lightweight blanket over her legs and a paperback on the nightstand and an oxygen line, thin and clear, looped under her nose. She had Caleb's dark eyes and the same quality of attention in them, the same direct, assessing look that did not agitate itself unnecessarily. She looked at him for a long moment after Sandra introduced him and closed the door. She said, "My son said you were all right." Mercer said, "That's very high praise from him." "I'm aware." The corner of her mouth moved. It was Caleb's movement, the same almost smile. She looked at him and he looked at her, and there was a brief moment of quiet in which two people who had both been doing hard things for different reasons in the same story acknowledged each other without ceremony. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He said, "I'm going to tell you something about myself that isn't easy to tell, and I'd like you to let me finish before you respond, if that's all right." She looked at him. "All right," she said. He told her. He told her about Mercer Capital and about Thornfield Industrial Partners and about the co-investment and about Valleycraft. He told it plainly, without the language of his industry, because the language of his industry was not built for this room. He said, "I signed a document 3 years ago that was part of a chain of decisions that resulted in the closure of the plant where your husband worked. I did not think carefully about what was behind the numbers I was looking at. I am not able to undo that. But I want you to know that I am aware of it and that the connection is not lost on me." Diane Roy was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the Millhaven afternoon went about its business, thin and gray, the same sky the whole state seemed to be sharing this week. She said, "Do you know what I thought when Caleb gave me your name on the phone this morning?" He waited. She said, "I grew up in this town. I know what Mercer Capital is. Everyone in Millhaven knew after 2019. She looked at him steadily. "I thought, well, there it is." He held the look. He said, "I deserved that." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Robert fell apart after the plant closed. I want to be clear that Robert falling apart was Robert's decision, not the plant's. He had a choice and he made it, and I stopped being angry about it a long time ago because anger at Robert wasn't useful." She looked at the window. "What I couldn't stop being angry about was the fact that a town can just stop. That people can sit in an office somewhere and sign a paper and a whole town just stops." She paused. "I worked at that plant for 14 years. The people who made those dining room sets were good people. They were proud of what they made." Mercer looked at his hands. He said, "I know." She looked at him. "Do you?" He said, "Not the way you know it." "No." She took a breath. It was careful, the breath of someone managing their lungs with attention. She said, "I'm not going to tell you that you being kind to my son makes it right, because that's not how things work." She paused. "But I'm also not going to tell you it doesn't mean something, because it does." She looked at him directly. "You could have walked past him every morning for a year. You didn't." He said, "He was reading." She looked at him with those eyes. She said, "He's always reading." They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Sandra Hollis looked in once at the 45-minute mark and saw that neither of them appeared to need anything and withdrew. They talked about Caleb, about what he was like, about the library and the atlas and the albatrosses and the note held under a rock. They talked about pulmonary fibrosis because Diane was the kind of woman who preferred to address things directly and Mercer was the kind of man who had learned, belatedly, to do the same. She told him what the doctors had told her, the medication protocol, the trajectory, the particular uncertainty that the word progressive attached to every projection. He said, "I have access to specialists in the city that Millhaven Regional may not. I would like to arrange a second opinion at a pulmonology center at the University Hospital. Full evaluation. No cost to you. Not as a gesture. As a practical step that I have the ability to take and that you have the right to access." She looked at him. She said, "And Caleb?" "Caleb is in a hotel 4 blocks from my office. He has a warm room and breakfast and the library atlas and a phone number to reach me. He's been eating regularly for 2 weeks." He paused. "He needs to be in school. That's the next conversation I want to have with you." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, "He's been out for almost 2 months. 8 weeks, Mercer said. He's 10. He'll catch up. He reads at a level that's considerably above his grade. His teacher will figure that out in about a week." She smiled. A real smile, wider than Caleb's, the full version of the thing Caleb kept at the edges. Changed her face. It was the face from the photograph. The woman squinting into the summer sun with her hand raised and something off camera making her laugh. She said, "All right." She said, "All right, Mr. Mercer." He said, "Tom." She said, "All right, Tom. Let's talk about what happens next." What happened next happened the way important things happened, not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of smaller ones that each required their own decision and their own care. The second opinion was arranged through the University Pulmonology Center in the city, a Dr. Francis Okafor who had trained in London and returned to Ohio and who had, when she reviewed Diane Roy's case file 3 days after Mercer's call to her department, a specific and careful thing to say about the medication protocol that differed from what Millhaven Regional had been doing, not dramatically, not in the way of a cinematic reversal, but in the meaningful incremental way that the difference between the right medication at the right dosage and the slightly wrong one accumulated over time into a materially different trajectory. She adjusted 2 things. She added a third. She said she wanted to see Diane monthly. Diane was transferred to the city, to a long-term care facility 3 miles from the Clement Hotel, in the 2nd week of November. She moved with a single suitcase and her paperback and her oxygen supply and a photograph of Caleb that Sandra Hollis had printed from the hospital's visitor log system, the most recent one they had, from the previous spring. She was in a room on the 3rd floor with a window that looked out over a courtyard where there were still, in November, a few stubborn chrysanthemums holding on. Caleb came on the afternoon of the transfer, after school, which he had started the previous Monday at Jefferson Elementary 8 blocks from the Clement Hotel. He came through the door of her room with the backpack over one shoulder and stopped in the doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then she opened her arms and he crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. And she put both arms around him and he put his face against her shoulder. And it was the specific and complete quiet of 2 people who have been held apart by circumstances and have found each other again and are not yet ready to do anything except confirm that the other is real and present and here. Mercer was in the hallway. He had driven Caleb. He did not go in. He sat in the chair outside her room and looked at the hallway and thought about the drive from the Clement. Caleb in the back seat with the atlas open to a page he had not been reading, looking out the window at the city moving past with the expression he wore when he was holding something large. He had said, "On the way, Mr. Mercer. What if she looks different?" Mercer had said, "She might look different. She's been sick." Caleb looked at the window. "I don't care about that," he said. "I just want to make sure she knows I don't care about that." Mercer had said, "She'll know." He sat in the chair outside the room for 45 minutes. When Caleb came out, his face had the particular quality of someone who has been through something demanding and has arrived on the other side of it. Not happiness exactly, but the thing that is more durable than happiness. Relief. The specific relief of something resolved. He said, "She wants to meet you properly. Not in a hospital room." He looked at Mercer. She said, "When she's stronger." Mercer said, "That sounds right." Caleb nodded. He looked at the hallway, at the chrysanthemums in the courtyard through the window at the end. He said, "She cried when I told her about Gerald and the jacket." He was quiet. "She cried about everything, actually. She kept saying she was sorry, and I kept telling her she had nothing to be sorry for." He paused. "We went back and forth on that for a while." Mercer looked at him. "Who won?" "We agreed to disagree," Caleb said. He picked up the atlas from where he'd put it on the seat beside Mercer's chair. He looked at it. "She wants to come to the hotel and have dinner with us when she's stronger. She said she wants to cook." He shook his head slightly. "She's on oxygen and she wants to cook." "She sounds like someone who knows what matters," Mercer said. Caleb looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "She does." The things Mercer did in the weeks after that were not done in a single dramatic announcement. They were done one at a time, in the order that the situation required, with the same patience and precision he had applied to every significant decision in his professional life, except that this time the precision was directed at something that did not appear in any model he had previously used. He enrolled Caleb at Jefferson Elementary through the city's administrative process, with Helen managing the documentation and a conversation with the principal, a woman named Dr. Yolanda Grant, who had been running urban elementary schools for 22 years, and whose response to the outline of Caleb's situation was not alarm but the specific, practical attention of someone who had seen most things and focused on what was actually needed. She assigned him to a fifth-grade teacher named Mr. Petrakis, who had, in Dr. Grant's words, a gift for kids who got to him by unconventional routes. Mr. Petrakis had Caleb's measure by Wednesday of the first week. He sent a brief note home on Thursday, addressed to Mercer since he was listed as the emergency contact, which said, "Caleb is the most genuinely curious student I have taught in 7 years. He already knows more about physical geography than most 8th graders. Please make sure he has pencils. He goes through them fast." Mercer read the note at his desk and sent Helen to get a box of pencils. He had the conversation with Marcus Webb that he had been working toward since the night he sent the text at 11:20. It was a longer conversation than either of them expected, and it took 2 sessions across 2 days, and it was the most honest conversation they had had in 16 years of partnership, which told them both something about what the other 16 years had been built on and what the next part needed to be built on instead. Mercer said, "I want to establish a community development fund, separate from the firm's existing charitable giving, specifically for communities where Mercer Capital's investment activity has contributed to economic disruption." He paused. "Millhaven is the first." Marcus said, "What kind of fund?" Mercer said, "The kind that does something actually useful. Workforce retraining, small business seeding, infrastructure where public funding has pulled back." He paused. "I want to bring in people from Millhaven to tell us what the fund should do. Not consultants. People who live there." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He said, "That's going to require us to admit, in writing and in public, that our deals have caused harm." Mercer said, "Yes." Marcus looked at the table between them. He said, "I've been waiting for this conversation for 5 years. Tom, I'm in." The fund was established in December. It was called the Valley Initiative, named for the river valley the furniture plant had sat beside. Its initial capitalization was $8 million, contributed equally by Mercer and Webb, outside the firm's structure and from their personal accounts, because they had agreed this should not be something the firm received credit for before it had earned it. They hired a director, a woman named Carolyn Price, who had spent a decade running economic development programs in the Ohio Rust Belt and who looked at their proposal and said, "This is either the most thoughtful thing a private equity firm has ever done or the most expensive press strategy I've seen. Which is it?" Mercer said, "We'll let the results answer that." Carolyn Price looked at him for a moment. She said, "All right." She took the job. In Millhaven, the fund's first action was the purchase and renovation of the empty Main Street storefronts, turned over to a small business incubator program that provided 6 months of free space and structured mentorship to local entrepreneurs. The second action was a partnership with the Regional Community College in Harker to establish a funded training program in advanced manufacturing and logistics. The third was an investment in a broadband infrastructure project that the town had been trying to finance for 3 years. None of these things happened overnight. None of them solved everything. Carolyn Price said, "From the beginning, That anyone who expected a fund to undo what a decade of disinvestment had done was confused about the timeline, and that the correct measure of success was not reversal but direction. Are things moving towards sustainable or away from it? That was the question. You had to be willing to ask it over several years, not several months. Mercer said he understood. He meant it. Caleb visited Millhaven in December, the week before the holidays, in the car with Paul driving and Diane in the passenger seat with her oxygen and her paperback and the expression of a woman returning to a place she knew completely and from which she had been separated against her will. She had improved enough under Dr. Okafor's adjusted protocol to be discharged from the long-term care facility, on the condition of continued monthly monitoring and a home care aide 3 days a week. The improvement was not a cure. It was not going to be a cure. But it was real, and it was measurable, and Dr. Okafor used the word stability, which she used carefully and which Diane received with the same careful precision. They stopped on Millhaven's Main Street. The renovation of the empty storefronts had just begun. The scaffolding up, the paper still in the windows, and Diane stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a while without speaking. Then she said to Mercer, who was standing beside her, "You're doing this." "We're doing it," he said. "We brought in people from town to tell us what to do." His voice was even. "We're doing what they said." She looked at the scaffolding. She looked at the hardware store that was still there and the pharmacy that was still there and the 2 women walking with strollers on the far side of the street, bundled against the December cold. She did not say anything more about the fund. She turned and looked at Caleb, who was standing a few feet away looking at the water tower at the end of the main street with the expression that meant he was thinking about something involving geography. She said, "Caleb." He looked at her. She said, "Gerald from the building. The guard." He nodded. She said, "I want to send him something. When we get back to the city. Something real. Not a card." Caleb looked at her. She looked back at him. The December light was thin and cold on Millhaven's Main Street, and behind them Paul waited by the car with the engine running. He said he left the jacket without a note. He didn't want to make it a thing. She said that's why he deserves something. Caleb thought about it. Then he said he drinks coffee from the cart on the corner. Every morning before his shift. Marco's cart. He has the same order every day. She smiled. The full smile, the photograph smile. She said, "I'll pay for the whole cart for a month." Caleb said, "He'll figure out it was you." She said, "Good." They drove back to the city in the late afternoon dark, the Ohio countryside running past the windows, and in the back seat Caleb had the atlas open on his knees, his finger on the page, but he was looking out the window at the fields, at the winter birds crossing in small formations above the dark earth. Diane was in the passenger seat with her eyes closed, not sleeping, resting with the particular settled quality of someone who has been to a place they needed to go and done what they needed to do there. Mercer drove. He had not planned to drive himself, Paul was available, but that morning he had said he'd take the wheel. He had wanted the experience of driving through the country between the city and Millhaven with these 2 people in the car, the woman who had raised the boy who had stopped him on a sidewalk by reading a library book, the boy who had taught him about albatrosses and magnetite and the way things always knew the way back. He drove and thought about the 41st floor and the view from up there, which showed you the shape of the city from above, the broad pattern of it, the infrastructure and the geometry, and he thought about the view from a sidewalk in an alcove, which showed you the same city from ground level, the detail and the texture of it, the paper clip and the worn sneaker and the note held down by a small rock. Both views were real. He had spent his career entirely in the first one. He was trying now to hold both at the same time, and what he had learned was that it was harder than it sounded and more necessary than he had understood. In the back seat, Caleb said, without looking up from the window, "Mr. Mercer." "Yes." "The Shearwater." He paused. "The one I told you about that spends half its life at sea." He was quiet for a moment. "It goes all that way and comes back, and the place it comes back to is not the place it left from. It's the same island, but it's changed. New birds are there. Things are different." He looked at the window. "But it still knows its home." Mercer looked at the road. "Yes," he said. "I've been thinking about that," Caleb said. He paused. "I think that's what Millhaven is for me. Still home, but I live in the city now." He paused. "Is that allowed? To have more than one home?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. He thought about the apartment that looked like no one lived there and the 41 floors and the clean, empty kitchen. He thought about the sidewalk in the mornings with the coffee going cold in his hand and a boy reading a library book and the specific and unrepeatable quality of those conversations before 6:30, before the day began, before the building filled with its ordinary business. He said, "I think you can have as many homes as you've earned." He paused. "I think that's exactly what you've done." In the passenger seat, Diane opened her eyes and looked out at the winter fields going dark around them. She put her hand on the door handle, not pulling it, just resting it there. She said quietly, not really to either of them, more to the dark fields, "When you've been sick for a while, you spend a lot of time worrying about the things you haven't given your child yet. All the things you meant to give them." She paused. "And then you find out they figured out most of it themselves." Nobody said anything for a while. The road ran straight between the fields. The car was warm against the December cold. Caleb said, "You gave me the library card." She turned to look at him over her shoulder. He was looking at her over the atlas with those eyes, the direct ones, the ones that saw what was actually there. She said, "That's everything, baby. That's the whole thing." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked back at the atlas, at the page with the migration routes, the long arcing lines across the Pacific, the impossible distances traveled and then traveled back. He turned the page. Outside, the first lights of the city appeared on the horizon. The far edge of it, growing closer as Paul drove, the skyline rising slowly out of the flat Ohio dark. Gerald received the coffee cart arrangement on a Monday in January. Marco told him when he came to the cart at 5:45 for his usual order that there was a month of mornings on an account already paid for, and that he was not going to tell Gerald who had done it because he had been asked not to. But that whoever it was had very specific knowledge of Gerald's order and had also, separately, apparently paid for a year of coffees for every overnight security worker at any building on the Hargrove block, which was either very generous or very thorough or both. Gerald stood at the cart with his coffee in both hands for a long moment. He looked at the entrance of 400 Hargrove, the ornamental hedge, the alcove where the cardboard had been tucked each morning behind the dense green. He took a long drink of his coffee. He said to Marco, "You're sure you can't tell me?" Marco said, "I was told the person would know you'd figure it out, and that was the point." Gerald nodded. He went to work. He did not say anything about it to anyone. But that morning, when Phil Draper arrived for the day shift and walked through the lobby without looking at the alcove, Gerald said, "Phil, you know that kid who was in the north alcove? The one Mr. Mercer asked us to leave alone?" Draper said, "Yeah." Gerald said, "He's enrolled at Jefferson Elementary. He's living with his mother 2 miles from here. He's doing well." Draper looked at him. He said, "Okay." Gerald said, "I'm telling you because I thought you should know how it ended." Draper nodded. He went to the desk. Gerald went about his morning. Mercer sold his penthouse apartment in February and bought a house 8 blocks from the care facility where Diane's specialist was located. Not because the apartment was bad or because the house was particularly suited to him as a person who lived alone, but because the apartment that looked like no one lived there had been accurate for a long time and he was tired of being accurate in that particular way. The house had a kitchen, he began, slowly and with the uncertainty of someone who had not cooked seriously in 20 years, to use. It had a room he set up with a desk and a chair and a floor lamp, for no specific purpose at first, and which Caleb, on his first visit, looked at and said, "Is this a reading room?" Mercer said, "I think it's becoming one." Caleb said, "Good," and came back the following Saturday with the atlas and his school books and used it for 3 hours while Mercer read in the chair by the window, and neither of them talked much. And the house had the specific quality that it had not had the previous week, the quality of a space that has been used by more than one person, the quality of a place where someone has been. Diane came to dinner in March. She brought food because she had said she would cook and she had meant it, and she arrived with a canvas bag and the oxygen and Caleb beside her, and she made a meal in Mercer's kitchen that she described as basic, and that was not basic at all but was the kind of food that is the product of a person who grew up cooking out of necessity and then cooking out of love and knows the difference between the two and combines them. She made a chicken and rice dish and a green salad and a cornbread that Caleb said was better than the Millhaven version, which she disputed with some specificity. They sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, in the March evening, the city outside the windows, the food and the conversation and the particular ordinary warmth of a table with people around it who were glad to be there. At some point during the meal, Mercer looked at Caleb, who was explaining to his mother about the magnetite crystals in the albatross's head, the built-in compass, the way the bird always knew north, and he thought about a November sidewalk and a library book open in the cold and a boy who had tested him before he trusted him and been right to do so. He thought about the paper clip and the note and the small rock and the 5 words that had done something to him he hadn't expected anything to do. He thought about what it cost and what it required to not look away the first time. How that was the whole thing. How it was always the whole thing. Caleb caught him looking. He said, "What?" Mercer said, "Nothing. Keep explaining about the crystals." Caleb looked at him with the long straight look. Then he turned back to his mother and kept explaining. Outside, the March evening was doing what March evenings did in the city. Still cold, but with something in it that was not quite winter anymore. A quality of the air that suggested the season was thinking about changing. The kitchen was warm. The food was good. The reading room down the hall had the atlas on the desk where Caleb had left it, open to the Pacific. And in a town called Millhaven, 60 miles north through the Ohio countryside, the scaffolding came down from the Main Street storefronts at the end of that same week, and the first 2 small businesses opened their doors on a Saturday morning in a place that had been empty and paper-windowed for 3 years, and a woman who ran one of them had worked in the Valley Craft Administrative Office for 11 years before the closure, and had taken the incubator program on a recommendation from Carolyn Price and had spent 6 months building something she had thought about for 3 years. She opened her door on a Saturday morning and swept the sidewalk in front of it and looked at the main street, at the water tower at one end and the hardware store and the pharmacy still standing and the traffic moving through on a Saturday. Not as much traffic as there once had been, but real traffic, the traffic of a town that was still there and intended to stay. She swept her sidewalk and went back inside and opened for the day. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Kindness if you haven't already. See you in the next story.